Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my crazy mother-in-law demands we give our house to my wife's pregnant sister. She goes absolutely crazy when we refuse and calls the police on us. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. And the first one starts like this. My wife and I have been together for 5 years now, and I always hated her mother. My mother-in-law is the most annoying person I've ever met, starting from the first second I met her. When she first saw me 5 years ago, she started telling me about how ugly and annoying I am. She always reminded me that I'm not good enough for her daughter and that she should leave me. I always tried not to say too much as I didn't want to upset my wife, whose relationship with her mother was not that good either. Her mother did not hate her as she hated me, but she loved her younger daughter more. My wife's younger sister has always been the problematic kid, but still, her mother loved her sister and vice versa and always judged my wife. I did not know my wife's sister that well as she was younger and she was always out having fun, never visiting us. My wife told me that her sister was a spoiled teenager that did not listen to anyone. Her sister was not a child anymore, but her mother still treated her like that, which annoyed me. My wife told me many stories from their childhood, and anyone could clearly realize that her younger sister was the favorite child of the family. My wife was the one that had to do the house chores and did not receive gifts on her birthday, and her sister was the exact opposite. With all of this, my wife still tried to be the best daughter that she ever could be. She always invited her mother to our apartment, where she always told us that we were poor and we were gonna die in that apartment and never improve our miserable life. My wife always bought her gifts and so on and tried to make her mother love her more. After almost 4 years of living in a small apartment, we finally had enough money to buy our first house. Our dream was finally a reality. We bought a house together. The house was in an area that we both loved a lot, and the house was just amazing. It had a big yard, a small pool, and a place for barbecue. The house was pretty big, nothing huge, but we loved it. "I cannot believe we did this," said my wife on our first night in our new house. "It's amazing," I replied, stunned by everything. As soon as we moved, my mother-in-law started rambling about things she did not like about the house. She did not like that the kitchen had a bluish theme and the living room a white theme, telling us that we have no taste in interior design. She told us that we did not need a pool and that we were just trying to look richer than we were. She told my wife that I wanted a house with a barbecue place so I can drink with my friends and cheat on her. She always found something she did not like in us, our things, or any decisions that we've ever made. "That apartment you had was way better," she said the second time she visited. "This house does not make any sense," she added. "You always said that you hated the apartment and that we should buy our own house," replied my wife. "We finally have our house, so I thought you would be happy," added my wife. "Yes, buy a house, but not this one. You know how beautiful my house is, the house you grew up in. You choose the wrong husband and now the wrong house," said her mother. "Mother, please don't start this again," said my wife with tears in her eyes. "You never like anything, don't you?" I asked, laughing. "I like nice and beautiful things, but apparently you don't have any of those," replied my mother-in-law with the most annoying facial expression. "This is nice, we like this and your daughter likes it." I took a deep breath so I don't say anything I would regret later. "You should be happy for her, proud of her," I added. I went outside and left my wife to discuss with her mother alone. Not long after I left, my wife shouted my name, so I went back in. "My mom wants to talk about something with both of us," said my wife. I took a seat on the couch and tried to prepare for the worst, but it was worse than I expected. "I was thinking that you should give this house to your younger sister and you could move back to the apartment," she said. "What?" asked my wife. "Your sister is pregnant, she is broke and she doesn't know who the father is. You are her sister and you should help her," continued my mother-in-law. "No way," I replied. "Why can't she keep staying with you?" asked my wife. "Because she's not my responsibility anymore. Plus, I don't want to hear a baby cry every day and I don't want neighbors to see her like that," she said. "But mom, this is our house. We worked hard to buy it. We sold the apartment and we spent all of our money on the house." "How can I give it to her for free?" asked my wife, crying. Out of anger, my mother-in-law started hitting her head on the table. She then climbed up the stairs and jumped down. She was looking like someone had just beaten her. My wife was crying and I was shocked, almost laughing in disbelief. My mother-in-law started crying as well and called the police. "Please come quick, my son-in-law is hitting me," she said on the phone. The police came and saw her laying on the floor. My wife and I were trying to move her on the couch, but she was kicking and hitting us. "She hit herself and then she jumped off the stairs," I told the policeman. "It's true," said my wife, crying. "We told my mom something she did not like and that's how she reacts," added my wife. "She jumped off the stairs because you fought and then called the police and blamed your husband?" asked the policeman. "Yes, that's exactly what happened. She is crazy," I shouted. To cut a long story short, the end of the story is that mother-in-law ended up in a mental hospital after a much-needed psyche evaluation. I'm not sure if she was actually crazy or she just acted that way, but she is in a safe institution now. After that, my wife's younger sister was alone with a baby on the way. We decided to help her and she stayed in our guest room. We took her to all her doctor's appointments that were needed and took care of her. After the baby was born, we helped her find a job and we all took turns in taking care of the baby. It was not easy, but I was doing all of it for my wife, who was very happy to help her sister. Fortunately for me, her younger sister was not even close to her mother. She was always helping with all the house chores and always tried to be a good guest. My wife and her sister visited their mother a few times, but I never saw her again after that day. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say props to OP and his wife for still taking care of their wife's younger sister. At first I had assumed that her sister would also be mega entitled like the mother, but it seems like the mother was the only bad person in this story. Anyway, the next one is titled "Revenge Can Be So Sweet." This is not my story, but I still laugh every time my friend tells it to someone else. My friend's father is a beekeeper and has his bees in the field near our hometown. There are a few unruly kids in the neighborhood, and one day they decided it would be fun to walk past the hives and knock them all over. Obviously, this would cause damage to the hives and disturb the bees. We had a pretty good idea who the culprits might be, but obviously nothing in our hands to accuse them. The bees were friendly and probably just got confused, but had not stung anyone. However, if you know anything about bees, not all are that friendly. For starters, some tend to get more and more aggressive when they stay in the same hive for several years. But there are also breeds that are less willing to accept disturbances in general. My friend's father bought a new swarm of bees from a different country, the kind you don't mess with because they are seriously aggressive. In fact, he would get the honey out of all the other hives when it was time to harvest, but left the last hive in the row untouched. Even he did not want to mess with those bees, the honey was not worth it and the hive was not put there to produce any. They were purely put there for revenge. As predicted, the neighborhood boys eventually returned. It was a warm summer day when my friend's stepfather discovered that the hives had been knocked over yet again and the bees were upset, including that last hive in the row. My friend's stepfather calmly put them back up and tended to the damage, then grabbed his car for a calm drive around town. When he passed the house of those unruly kids, they were in the garden, covered in bee stings and looking absolutely miserable. Each of them had angry red bumps all over their faces and arms, smeared with white ointment. According to my friend's father, those angry bees had barely left a patch of exposed skin untouched. It's a small town, and they of course knew whose hives they had knocked over. My friend's stepfather honked, waved at them with a smile and drove on to do his shopping. The boys looked at him with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. But what could they do? My friend's father was free to keep any breed of bees he wanted, and they had trespassed and damaged his property and paid the price for it. Needless to say, no one touched those beehives ever again. And yeah, ripe stars, I would say they definitely got what they deserved for trespassing on property they have no business being in. Either way, the next one is titled "Just Honest Good Revenge." The setting: I worked in a moving company for a year before being laid off, along with half the crew as I was told. And during that time I would learn just how, I wouldn't say pompous, more like bossy, some clients tend to be. Military types fit this requirement most definitely, and understandable some ways, insufferable in others. Now the story: a client, we will call him Entitled, wanted his stuff moved from a decent place in San Diego to a spot in the downtown area. A really nice apartment he picked out too. Now, the policy the company had was that he pays for 2 hours worth of work when he books a move, to basically somewhat guarantee some amount of income, and after those 2 hours we charge him the hourly rate. As myself and 2 other guys are busying ourselves with wrapping all the furniture, loading up the cardboard moving boxes and hauling up all the stuff and into the truck, I overheard entitled dude talking to his wife saying something like, "I will only pay them for 2 hours for the move total. No big deal, sweetie." No big deal, I say to myself, and I take the time afterwards to let the guys know it's most likely one of the 2-hour jobs. Nothing we have not done before, but hey, mild annoyances at best. An hour passes and everything is loaded up in time. I write down the time, started the truck, and off we go. We don't charge them for the transportation of the move. But when we reached the destination and we found parking, entitled seems to be unnerved. And here's why. The apartment unit is 7 stories high, overlooking much of the downtown area near Petco Park Stadium. However, that's not the case, it was the elevators. And said elevators are currently in use by the other tenants, with 45 minutes of the 2-hour job left to go, as I already told the boys to start unloading, since we figured already how to work with this. Again, I overhear entitled dude say something under his breath. Something along the lines of, "How come they didn't reserve the elevators? Damn it." Not sure if it was towards me or the apartment tenant, but given that he's had that kind of attitude since we started, I was suspicious that those words were aimed at me and the crew. So what does he do? Usually in this situation most clients crumble and go along with it, but not Mr. Entitled. He starts shouting at us to hurry the F up while myself and 2 other co-workers are busting our asses to unload the boxes and send them up the elevator. I am tired, my lungs are burning from the strain of the job and my entire body is sweating pretty damn profusely, plus I got the client pacing back and forth looking like he is about to explode. Finally, entitled dude snaps and starts an argument with me about the 2-hour mark passed and how he is not paying for the rest of the move, red-faced and screaming at my face. A-hole mode engaged. Formulating escape route.exe in progress. Initially, I've tried to calm him down and just when the other 2 guys reappear from the elevator, I tell them to stop. I look to entitled dude and asked amidst the screaming if you want to continue the move past the 2-hour mark and he said yes. I then asked to clarify that you'll not be paying us for the remainder of the move past the 2-hour mark, as it will render our services complete, and he said yes. I also ask if he is sure, as we will not move anything into the apartment once our services are complete. He gives me this "are you kidding me?" face and says, "I paid you dudes to move my crap into my apartment." I hit back with, "Sir, you paid for 2 hours of our time." To which the man said, "I'm not gonna pay you extra." And there it was, hook, line and sinker. I radioed Central, let them know my times for the move and also notified them of the completion of the contract. Once that was done, I gathered up the paperwork, had him fill it out, who then stormed off back up the elevator and most likely satisfied at his skill in negotiations. Once that was done, I told the boys to unload again, this time into the street. But scribe, why would you throw out this man's furniture into the street? So that's a pretty mean thing to do, good question. I love these questions. Reddit does not really ask, and here is why. Because now that he signed the papers releasing us from the contract, his things essentially are now his things in our truck. There was nowhere else to put them except on the street. When he finally put 2 and 2 together, we had already unloaded the last of his things from the truck in about 15 minutes, which was not too bad, and another half hour and we would be done and over with. But sadly, that was not the case. After arranging entitled dude's boxes and some furniture neatly in an organized fashion, strapping the moving equipment down and taking pictures of the back of the truck to prove we did not take anything, I got onto the truck with my guys and drove off back to Central, where we drank all the water we could find, ate through our lunches and then some and clocked out. And yeah, ripe stars, I would say that's a pretty good satisfying ending to the story for an entitled douchebag. The next one is titled, "She broke into my house and lit a fire." So my grandma lives in the countryside at the end of a very long lane in a valley and has owned 3 acres of the land around her house for the past 30 years. She is essentially bedbound and is no longer capable of caring for the land she owns, but she has a gardener for around 10 years or so we thought. Me and my family live on the other side of the country and we were unable to visit her for 9 years, but frequently call her to make sure she's doing okay and order anything she needs. One day, she did not answer the phone and the police found her on the floor, several windows smashed, greenhouse in shards and lots of broken plant pots. Local teens had decided to start destroying the property for fun and my grandma felt scaring them off and was unable to get back up. We traveled to her last year after this incident occurred and found the property looking like a mini forest/woods. Her gardener had fallen ill years ago and she had not told us and therefore the land became heavily overgrown. This meant that many dog walkers, cyclists, tourists and holidaymakers had become used to walking through her property, as well as the local groups of teens who had used her bottom garden as their place to hang out. Over the past few months we've been clearing away all the overgrowth to make it look like a garden again. In this time many people have tried walking their usual routes, to which we have said this is actually private property and the official footpath is few hundred meters down the road. Some accepted this without problem, but others fought us with comments such as, "But we've been walking this way for years, you don't have the right to tell us to leave," and tried to force their way past us. We were understanding as the land did look heavily overgrown, but it's in fact private property and we needed to keep my grandma safe. At night, we had to call the police on an aggressive group of teens who had set a small campfire in her garden and would not leave, but due to a lack of a clear fence and signage, they were let go almost immediately. Fair enough, so we set up a fence all the way around the property with signs and CCTV by the house to enforce the fact that the land was owned and people needed to keep out. 2 weeks later, we found this fence had been pulled out of the ground completely in some places, the private property signs had been written on and partially set on fire. Lots of aggressive comments and bad language was written on them, along with "Your house is next." The night after we discovered this, we caught a group of teens right up next to the house and my grandma heard them debating about how they were going to break in to see what they could steal. They were going to throw a garden chair through the conservatory window, but my grandma started screaming her head off at them, which woke us up and scared them off. We have them on CCTV and have passed it on to the police, but we don't know if they are the same group as the ones that set fire to the fence. The property now looks more owned and cared for, but even so, these groups of teens still keep coming onto the property and breaking stuff and setting fires. We are in the process of getting the CCTV set up so that it covers the whole property, not just a house so that we have the proof for the police, but we are only able to stay at hers every other weekend or so, because we all work and because of the distance, progress is slow. I am so scared that I'm gonna get a phone call saying the house has been set on fire, like they threatened, or my grandma has been hurt because of these entitled teenagers who think they can keep doing what they like on the property regardless of fences, signs and police involvement just because they've been hanging out there for years. And my grandma physically cannot stop them anymore and we cannot be there for long enough periods of time to keep them off the property permanently. Final update, so all the CCTV was finally set up completely and we caught these entitled douchebags on camera once again. The police tracked them down and they will now face the consequences for their actions. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm very happy that the story ended like this, because these entitled teenagers did not seem just like entitled teenagers, but they actually seemed to be scary and dangerous. I was really worried for the grandma in the story. Either way, thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you again tomorrow.